What's up, guys? EJ Stewart, Kendall here. New Generation Media giving you guys another video today. We'll be talking about NBA draft risers and fallers in this upcoming NBA draft season. So we know the conversation now that the NBA draft lottery's been set. We know where everybody's been picking. So now you're starting to see these guys jockey for position as to where they'll be taken in next month's NBA draft. Now, Kendall, I like this conversation we're going to have because in some ways it's us kind of trying to forecast some of the storylines that we'll see. You know, some of these teams, of course, have gotten to interview guys and talk to guys during the NBA draft combine. Now you have guys coming in for workouts. You have guys coming in for more interviews, more visits to facilities. So we'll learn more about what's going to be happening with these guys. And given what we saw from these players in their college seasons, in their international seasons, in their high school careers, in their G League careers, in their overtime elite careers, a lot can happen between now and then. So I'm actually really excited to have this conversation to see kind of where we may see some of the storylines happen and where we may see guys who we thought were going to go lower, maybe go a little higher by the time we get to draft night, and where we see some guys who we thought will go higher by the time we get to draft night, maybe they fall a little bit. So it should be a good conversation here.
Yeah, I think that there is. What's funny about this video is I don't know for a fact that these are guys that are actually rising and falling as much as it is like the media is off on some of these guys.
Right, that's what happens. Yeah,
you know, teams are probably pretty comfortable with their boards and probably pretty comfortable with their evaluations on some of these guys. Workouts matter in the NBA for sure, but I don't think we're going to see guys move up 20 spots from where they were just based off of a workout or a combine.
Right.
But the media isn't hip to some of these guys, and like you said, once word starts to get out that Jalen Williams, there might there was a feature written by ESPN on how the Thunder came into this draft process, for a long time last year, tracking Jalen Williams. That was the guy they wanted for, pretty much the whole cycle. And,
yeah.
But, the media wasn't hip to that really at all, even up until draft night. So, I think that there are guys that rise because the media doesn't know about it, and there are guys that rise because they're workout warriors. But for whatever reason, I think that we have an interesting list of guys that will rise and fall for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have guys who rise and fall due to agent talk. Like how many agents talk themselves into getting their guy into mock drafts in the lottery, guys who aren't close to being lottery picks, guys who end up being second round picks. So yeah, or guys who don't have agents who maybe don't do as good a job at telling the media where the guy's going to go, and then maybe behind the scenes they're doing a very good job schmoozing with these GMs to get these guys in certain positions. So yes, should be definitely a fun thing to follow throughout this entire draft season. So I want to begin first, and I'm going to talk about a guy who I've had my eye on for a little while, given kind of his high school pedigree, and he had a kind of a weird season in his first year, only year in college basketball. But my first pick here, I'm going Derek Lively as a riser. Duke center. This guy was the number one player by many accounts coming into this past season at Duke in terms of freshman. And I'll be honest, the numbers, you look at them, they're going to look a little pedestrian. Look about 5 points, 5 rebounds. He didn't necessarily have, or not necessarily, he definitely did not have a great start to his season at Duke. But I think you saw him really come on as the season went on. And I think what you're really going to like, I think in terms of the NBA, in terms of what NBA teams will see, is you're going to see a guy who's such an impact player defensively. And when it comes to NBA defense, the most important thing is you got to be able to guard the three. You got to be able to guard the rim. You got to have some switchability, versatility as well. If you can do all three of those things, or at least two of those three, if you're a big, you're going to have a spot in the NBA. And Lively is very athletic. Lively is an absolute terror when it comes to trying to score on him. He's 7 foot. He's long. He's athletic. He's got great long arms. He's got a great vertical leap. So defensively, I think you see him. One of these teams will say, this guy's an impact player. We could put him in next year, and he'll thrive. I also think Walker Kessler is going to actually help Derek Lively's stock this year, because Kessler is a player who didn't necessarily have the greatest offensive numbers in terms of gaudy volume numbers, but he was fortunate enough to play with some guards that actually were able to find him and get him the ball. Lively didn't have that. Lively didn't have guards who necessarily were great in terms of getting him easy baskets, alley-oops, I think NBA teams will say, hey, we get this guy around NBA guards, he can finish. I mean, that's something we saw even at Duke in the limited time he had. Some of the good games he had, we started to see what we saw in high school. I think get him around that. I think he tried to develop him as a defensive big and a guy who maybe his production suggests maybe he should be drafted late first round. Don't be surprised if you see Derek Lively's name drafted maybe in the lottery, maybe in that late teen range. But I think Derek Lively's the player that you see rise, and maybe people get surprised at how high he goes. So Lively's my first pick here.
Yeah, no, Lively is a guy that I think is interesting because his, even in high school when he played for Team Final on the EYBL circuit, he flashed a little bit of shooting potential as well.
Exactly. I saw shout out to Rafael Barlow, but apparently he was doing workouts at the combine and he was draining quarter threes like they were nothing. Now we hear this story all the time with these guys, and
Willie Cauley-Stein was supposed to be Victor Wembanyama.
Yeah, and there's some guys where you just don't know. Like the whole word was that Karl-Anthony Towns was this amazing shooter. And I just didn't believe it. Cause I'm like, he never shot at Kentucky, so why would I believe he's a great shooter? And he comes to the NBA, and he's one of the best shooting bigs to ever play in the league. And once day one. So, yeah, what if he comes in and now he can actually shoot the three ball, something that he didn't really show much.
Obi Toppin was saying coming to the league, he could dribble like a guard. And
right.
I question some of that sometimes, but...
Yeah, now you see him, and he's bringing the ball full court, and he's going coast to coast. It's
exactly.
There's some things that guys just aren't allowed to do when they're playing their college team. Yeah. So I really do think that. Also, he's playing with a rookie coach, a guy who maybe didn't necessarily know how to get the best out of him in year one. I think if Lively plays for Coach K, I think he has an entirely different first year. I think he has a much better season. I think NBA teams will see that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so for me, I think my first riser is going to be Chris Murray. We're talking about a guy, obviously, he's got the pedigree with his brother having the rookie year that he had for the Sacramento Kings, his brother Keegan, obviously, who he played with at Iowa. And the Iowa basketball system is honestly, if I was a recruit and I was a forward, I'd love to go to Iowa just because, we saw it with Luka Garza, we saw it with Keegan, and now we saw it with Chris that once it's your time to ball out, you're gonna get your shots up. You're gonna be productive offensively. Yeah. Chris Murray was a guy that was a strict role player his whole career, his first 2 years at Iowa, and then once he had the room to show what he had in his arsenal, he emerged as a guy that was a 20+ point scorer in the Big Ten. He's really just a left-handed version of his brother in a lot of ways. Maybe not as explosive, and maybe a step, a notch below in terms of the skill level, but a notch below Keegan Murray, who's a top 5 pick, might want to be the guy that's a top 15 pick, and that, is a guy that who right now is not being necessarily mocked as a lottery pick, being mocked a lot more in the late first round. But I think we were talking about teams that are looking for win now guys. I mean, a lot of times in that late lottery, we see older players. We saw, Jalen Williams get drafted, being a slightly older player. We saw, Cam Johnson get drafted a lot higher than people thought he'd be drafted because he's a veteran player. A lot of times teams in that late lottery are looking for veteran guys, and I think that Chris Murray fits the bill for that kind of player. So I think that mock drafts have him in the late first round right now. I think he ends up going higher than that in this draft.
Yeah, Murray, a very productive player at Iowa, not just this year, but in his second year as well when he played with his brother Keegan, who's a superstar in his second year. I like seeing Chris being able to, show that he could play kind of a role player role. Like, the 3-point shot that he had so much volume on this year, we saw the percentage drop when he shot with a little less volume, playing more of a spot-up role. He shot almost 40% from 3. I think he shot 38% from 3. So I think that helps him. And I think that I agree with him being a riser. So I think that Keegan's great rookie year, I think, is going to open eyes to people who say, hey, there may be something in this bloodline that maybe we shouldn't overlook in terms of their ability to kind of come in year one and make an impact. Clearly, this is a guy who, again, has been productive. His teams have won at Iowa. So, yeah, I've been a little surprised to see how low I've seen Murray's rankings, especially given this class being, not as high powered as some of the other classes we've had of late. So I agree. I think Chris Murray is a guy who I could definitely see being drafted a little higher than people think. If he goes a lottery or a late teens as well, I think that would not surprise me. Okay, so I'm going international here with my pick here. A name that has been one of the mystery men because he played very little for his team overseas. But I'm going to go with Tristan Vukcevic. This is a guy from Serbia. He played, of course, European basketball. Really young player. And the team he played on, he essentially got almost no burn. So there was a guy that people in draft circles had been familiar with, and they were saying, hey, who is this guy? He's tall. It looks like he can shoot a little bit, but like he doesn't get any time. Like, can he actually play? And then lo and behold, he goes into the draft combine, and he's playing in the scrimmages. Shout out to him for going out there and playing in these scrimmages because there are way too many guys who I don't think are first round picks that were ducking the smoke in the scrimmages. And this guy went out there and he was the best player on the floor almost immediately. And you're like, whoa, who is this guy? Where did he come from, and why wasn't he playing for his European team? So this guy is 6'10". He's got really good size. He can shoot the ball effortlessly. He's got a nice mid-range, fadeaway jump shot. And as we know in the NBA, you got some length and you can shoot the ball at a consistent clip. Teams will look for you. They will find you, and they're going to take a shot on you. So Vukcevic is a guy that was being talked about as late second round. Maybe this is a guy that is now early second round. Maybe this is a guy that gets taken in the late first round. I think that he was that impressive with how he played this year. So I really liked what I saw from him. I'm going to put him as one of my risers, a guy who people had been intrigued by but didn't really know what to expect. I think that they were almost shocked at how dominant he was during the combine.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've already seen, Real Madrid does a really good job of putting out guys in the NBA. They have their own evaluation process over in Europe that's strong, yeah. Whether it be with Luka or Usman Garuba. So yeah, I mean, it's not a shame. I mean, they just won the EuroLeague title this weekend. I mean, they're at power, so it's not surprising that he wasn't able to find minutes. But like you said, really got on the radar for a lot of teams and has the tools for sure. My next guy is a guy that I think a lot of people are not super. I think teams got more familiar with him, and I think people got more familiar with him as they were tracking Brandon Miller. And I think my guy is Noah Clowney, big man out of Alabama, who is really, really raw at this stage of his career, but I think he fits a lot of the archetypes for the modern NBA big in terms of his ability to protect the rim, his ability to shoot the basketball for his size. I mean, he's a real 6'10". He's only 18 years old right now, going to be 19 in a little bit. But, again, shoots the ball at a high clip, spaces the floor, protects the rim, good athlete, needs to get maybe a little bit stronger. You maybe wish he was a little bit bouncier than he is, but he's just athletic enough. He strikes me as the kind of guy that teams are going to that one of these teams is going to take a chance on, similar to how we saw Jalen Smith get drafted in the late lottery. It only takes one team to see a guy and say, this guy could be our starting center in 3 years if we mold him the right way. Again, I think his shooting ability is really what's going to help him rise up to it. And it's funny because, you talk about Lively, you talk about Clowney, and I think those guys are in many ways probably going to be competing for whatever team picks them. Whatever team picks them, whoever gets picked first, they'll probably be competing against each other for that spot. So, I think that those guys offer some similar skill sets. So I think Clowney, we saw it he was a little bit more productive in his freshman season at Alabama, as opposed to Lively was a little bit more hit or miss but he was on a much better team. He had a eighth-year point guard in Javon Quinterly. He had another veteran point guard in Mark Sears, and obviously playing next to a phenom like Brandon Miller, made the job a little bit easier. But for sure, I think Clowney's going to wind up being a guy that I'd be surprised if he makes it out of the top 20, 25 picks.
One of the things I like about Clowney, and it's one of the things I say all the time about particularly bigs, but almost any NBA player that's coming into the lottery or in the NBA draft. You got to be able, if you can rebound, you got a shot. And Clowney is a great rebounder, one of the better rebounders in this draft. And even though he may not be as physically built as maybe you would like, the fact that he's willing to throw his body around and get after on the glass, and then also show that stretch potential. I know his three-point shot came up and down, but he had some big games where he hit some big threes. He had a game against South Dakota State. We had 5 threes on 12 attempts. So we know he can shoot the ball. Alabama encouraged their guys to take a lot of threes. He got a little cold as the season kind of winded down. And I think maybe he kind of wore down a little bit. But I like Clowney. I agree. I think that this is a really solid player and a guy who is raw. It's going to take him a little while, but the fact that he can rebound the ball, the fact that he has some stretch potential, that's going to give him a chance. And I think the teams are going to like that doing this at 18, 19 years old. I like this pick as a guy who could rise.
I think Nick Claxton's development in Brooklyn will be something that teams point to, and that might help him in this draft process for Clowney. Definitely.
I do agree with that as well. Okay, so let's get to some of the guys who unfortunately I think may fall here. So the one guy I want to mention first, I'm going to go Nick Smith. Point guard, Alabama. So this is an interesting one because Smith is a guy who was, one of the most highly touted guys in this freshman class. But I think when you think about what Nick Smith did at Arkansas, just didn't really move the needle. I think he's not as athletic as he thought he would be. Not as shifty as he thought he would be. Didn't really shoot the ball as much as he thought he would be. So when we talk about, when I'm talking about drafting a guard, especially, as we've seen, Kendall, like that, there are carnivores in this league. Like, these are not players that you can kind of walk in and say, all right, you kind of had a rough freshman year, but you go to the NBA, you'll figure it out. Like that's not how it works. Like, you're going against the best players in the NBA, the most skilled players in the NBA. They're all playing the point. So when I look at Nick Smith, I gotta look and say, okay, what do you do right now that gets you on the floor immediately? And I couldn't point to anything. I think he has a level of craft, and I think that he is still young. So I think he can certainly become an NBA guard. But you're talking about drafting him in the lottery. I would not be surprised if he's not in the lottery. Maybe late teens, maybe even early 20s. But Nick Smith is the guy who I thought was a little disappointing in his first year at Arkansas. So I'm going to say that he misses the boat here, and we do not see him drafted in the lottery. So therefore, I have him as one of my guys falling.
Wow. That is, yeah, I mean, look, I don't think that is impossible. The thing about Nick Smith is, and I think that what will help him in terms of his draft slot, one, I mean, whenever you're talking about these guys that were highly touted out of high school that maybe struggled a little bit, is it only takes one team to draft a guy to prevent a real slide. So, I mean, it really, if one of these teams just throws out the Arkansas experience altogether, he still might wind up in the lottery. But I think what will help him a little bit, what hurt him at Arkansas, is I don't know if the fit next to Anthony Black, who, he was out at the beginning of the season, and Black really emerged as the alpha dog, floor general, lead guard. And by the time Nick Smith got healthy and got acclimated into the offense, his role was kind of stand in the corner guy and just figure it out. And, what made Nick Smith so dynamic in high school, playing for Brad Beal Elite on the EYBL circuit was, his ability to play with the ball in his hands, his ability to play and pick and roll. He's very, very much he reminds me a lot of D'Angelo Russell when he's on, and D'Angelo Russell's value is accentuated when he's got the ball in his hands, especially, when he was coming out of Ohio State. So I think that figuring out what his role was at Arkansas and making sure that you can like maximize what he could do. But I agree, like D'Angelo Russell wasn't ready to play point guard in the NBA when he got to the
No,
league.
he was number 2, and he had a much better freshman year than Nick Smith did.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. We're talking about a guy who was, a much better passer, obviously, as well.
Right.
So yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy. It's not an easy task for a guy that doesn't have like an elite physical trait or an elite skill set.
But think about this, Kendall, too, and one of the other reasons why I was down on Smith is I think there's going to be competition at the point guard spot, too, in terms of these guys going in the lottery. Because you're going to have Amen Thomas, who would be the second guard besides Scoot, I would think. Though maybe it's Anthony Black. You got Anthony Black, and then you got Wallace, and then you got Hood Shafino, who I think is really underrated, who I think is better than Nick Smith. You got the kid from Michigan, like they're gonna, Buffin, like they're now it becomes okay. How many of these teams are looking to draft a point guard? How many of these teams are looking to add a 18, 19-year-old guy that all these guys are probably gonna have to develop and may not be the big impact guys in year one. Like how many of these teams are willing to take a risk on all of these guys? Like somebody's going to fall. Now maybe Nick Smith's pedigree will allow him to kind of get ahead of some of these guys because almost all the guys I named, people thought he was better than coming into this year, and then he didn't necessarily show it when he actually started playing. But I do wonder if he kind of may run out of spots in terms of teams that will take a flyer on a rookie point guard.
The thing about Nick Smith is that, I mean, this is a guy that going into the season was a lock, not only lock strong, but was a projected top 5 pick.
Yeah.
Some people thought would be that number 3 guy after Scoot and Victor. So that is what's tough is that like he wasn't great, and I mean the end, against UConn and didn't play great against Kansas. Like the NCAA tournament was really bad for Nick Smith. So that's never great as well. But like he never really had a real shake, in a system that I think people wanted to see him in. So like. That is the saving grace is that like, if you really thought that he was this guy and this is what NBA scouts really thought about him, and maybe they didn't. Maybe that was just media, overrating him. That was high school evaluators. But if you really thought he was this guy that could be a top 5 pick based off of his ball skills, like he didn't do anything to like really mess him. So it wasn't Imani Bates at Memphis, where it was like, all right, we saw this guy for a whole year, look bad. Or some of these other guys that we've seen, Scott Labissiere at Kentucky.
Well, the other thing, too, is that, he dealt with injuries, and that's another big thing. Yeah. And maybe it goes one way or the other. But, like, maybe you say, look, because I do think he's slight. I think he's got to put on some weight. He's got to get stronger. But he did deal with injuries. You may say, okay, this is a guy who wasn't healthy last year. And
I think Musselman has, I think his name carries weight in NBA circles. And I
definitely,
think that,
yeah.
I don't think he's going to say bad things about Nick Smith. That's just my guess.
I would think so. Yeah, I agree.
I mean, I'm sure I know for a fact he loves Black, but
how could he not?
Yeah, he's not. Obviously, he was excellent for him. But like Nick Smith, I'd assume he'd also, kind of give him a pass for what he had to deal with. But my first faller is a guy with a similar kind of profile to Nick Smith in terms of super highly touted freshman who dealt with major injury problems. I'm going with Derek Whitehead, freshman out of Duke, who, was, I believe he was Gatorade Player of the Year his senior year at Montverde. And some people thought it was a recruiting class that had 1 million guys who were the number 1 player in the country. He was one of them that some people thought was the number 1 guy, depending on the service you decide to read. And he came in with a lot of hype, with a great recruiting class, and started off the season with a foot injury and had surgery on it, surgically repaired. Came back earlier than I think a lot of people thought he would, and was okay. Wasn't terrible. Wasn't maybe the dynamic athlete that he was throughout his high school career.
Yeah.
Sort of changed his game into being a little bit more of a catch and shoot 3-and-D guy. And was still effective, but not as dynamic as I think people had hoped. And then, and freshman season ended, and just most recently is electing to get another surgery done to fix some stuff that happened with his surgically repaired foot. sort of the feeling is maybe he came back too early,
Right.
and maybe that they'll be able to clean some stuff up. Not stuff that you like to hear when you're talking
No.
about multiple surgeries for a guy who's
19 years
19.
old. Yeah.
But um, and then this is the thing. Look, I like Dariq Whitehead a lot. I think that a healthy Dariq Whitehead is a guy that I think is a lottery pick, based off what he proved in high school. But I don't think that that's what'll happen. I think he'll wind up being maybe a late first round guy, may even drop into the second round. The comp for me with Dariq Whitehead is I think he's Michael Kidd Gilchrist with a jump shot, which is not a
Mm.
bad player per se. Is another guy who another New Jersey wing that
I mean,
played.
is he? I mean, not to. I mean, I never thought I'd be doing this. Well, no, I know. I guess I see it. No, I see what you're saying. Is he the defender of Michael Kidd Gilchrist? You think?
No way. I mean, look, Michael
Right.
Kidd Gilchrist.
That was I guess why I was standing.
And look, so I will say this. So obviously, both guys played for Kevin Boyle. Both New
Yeah.
Jersey guys. They
Yep.
um, Kid Gilchrist ended up being a little overrated as a defender.
That is fair.
Which is fair, but not the defensive prospect coming out of college for sure. But I think Whitehead was also not fully healthy, not in basketball shape, per se.
That's
but
true.
but yeah, no, I think yeah, Kilgariff is a little bit more of a dog than Whitehead, but they have some of that. Whitehead's brother Tahir played linebacker in the NFL, very physical. Again, Northeast guy plays with a pit bull mentality, similar to Kid Gilchrist, but he can shoot it a little bit better than Kid Gilchrist can, a lot better, which is not
Yeah.
saying much, but and I think he shot it better than he did in high school. So look, I like Whitehead, but I don't think I think he will wind up falling as we go into the draft.
Yeah, Whitehead, a very interesting, weird kind of season at Duke. Like he almost was, it wasn't like it was awful. It just was not what we thought he was, and part of that may have been because of the injury. He had to kind of transform his game. He kind of played like an AJ Griffin role at Duke, and that's not really the guy that he was in high school. So it's kind of bizarre to kind of see. He did make an impact when he was healthy, but the second injury I think is concerning. I think there's a chance that people will like the fact that he shot the ball so well at Duke that they'll say, okay, we get this guy healthy. We know what he could be given what we saw in high school. We know he's a much more physical player. We know he can score in isolation. He kind of reminded me a little bit coming into college of Harrison Barnes. So if he can kind of keep that shooting that we saw and then keep the kind of one-on-one game that made him a top 2 or 3 guy in his class, then now you're looking at a player who should go 15, should go top 20. Maybe there's a team that still thinks that guy's there, but I agree the injury will be something to follow here. So I think that's a good pick as well. Okay, so I'll give another guy here, my final guy here, a faller. This is a guy, Kendall. I've watched the tape. I tried, and I get it, but I still am not convinced that teams are going to take a major flyer on this guy. So I'm going to go with Ryan Rupert from France playing for the New Zealand Breakers here. He's going to be my final faller. And look, it only takes one team. So it only takes one team to say, hey, we're going to take a flyer on this kid and give him a shot. He is really long. He does some things when you watch the tape where you're just like, holy crap, how the hell did he do that? But to be honest, like I think some ways like he's one of those guys that would actually scare me if like you're not watching full games of him and you're just watching a highlight reel. And the highlight reel, he looks phenomenal if you see him racking off 2 or 3 threes in a row. But then when you look at the numbers, then you watch some of these games and you see the production. I just don't think that this kid is really ready for the NBA right now. He's only 18 years old. He'll turn 19 by the time the draft is here. He's extremely raw. The ball skills are there. There's a semblance of a shot that looks like, okay, if he gets that shot to fall consistently, he can really maybe do something. He's 6'6", 6'7", but and kind of I list him there as a small forward. He could play shooting guard. He could even play some point. But I just think he's so raw. And I think the reason why I picked on Ryan, I don't mean to pick on him because I think he has potential. But when I look at the draft order, and I look at those teams and where he will be going. So you're talking about probably late teens to somewhere in the 20 range. the NBA right now is in a weird position where you have a lot of teams who feel like they could make a run. Like these are not team like the NBA is in kind of flux right now. There's not this idea that there's some big juggernaut out there, so we can afford to just take a draft a guy who's going to be stashed for a couple of years in the first round and then have him come back and be ready. Like there may be teams say, hey, let's get a guy who can come in and contribute in a year or maybe two, or maybe next year and actually help us out, help us win games. I just from what I saw from Rupert, I didn't know if I saw a guy who would be able to do that. So I've seen them as high as the late lottery. I've seen them as high as the mid-teens. I think he goes in the 20s. I don't think you see him drafted that high. I think that it's going to take one of these teams that maybe has a second pick, like the Nets, who are kind of in a weird position where they don't really know what their identity is. Maybe Portland on a second pick. Maybe Indiana on a second or third pick. But I don't know if you're your Sacramento's, your Memphis's, your Lakers, your Heat, your Warriors, your Hawks, your Pelicans. Like, are those teams really taking a Ryan Repair at this point when they see how close they are to maybe actually being able to do something in their respective conferences? I think that would be a wasted pick given where those teams are in terms of the age on their roster. So that's why Repair I have falling. Maybe not necessarily all on him as a player. He's a young kid who has potential, who's going to try to figure it out, but he's still a long ways away from, as I could tell. I combine that with the teams and where the NBA landscape is, and I say I don't know if these teams are just looking to add an 18-year-old project.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the statistical profile is really bad at this stage, and he's
very pedestrian.
So
yeah.
I mean, you give him.
And I tell you what, man, playing those like Australian, New Zealand leagues, like that's a good league, but like you need to produce. Like there are some leagues where I can kind of overlook you not scoring or not doing much because like you're playing in the ACB. Like we keep it real. Like they just won't play you because they're trying to win championships like that.
Yeah.
Like it's a real thing. If you're young, they're gonna play the guys who they think will give them the absolute best chance to win. But like I feel like the kids that have played over there, if they don't produce at all, like I think we see them struggle. Like RJ Hampton played over there and was, a very pedestrian when it came to his numbers and his production. Terrence Ferguson went over there, very pedestrian. And we kind of say, oh, well, whatever. It's international league, kids are adjusting. Like, the guys that have come over who did perform, LaMelo Ball, Giddey, like, those guys came, those are the guys that are ready to play. It wasn't the guys that were averaging 2 points a game, 3 points a game. So that is why, and then we got the kid Dieng last year, who is at OKC, just wasn't a player basically. I don't know how many guys are going to be looking to add that kind of piece given where he's being slotted right now in the draft.
I tend to agree. I think your point about like the state of the league, I think is important, and that there aren't all these teams that are going to be dying for a guy like him right now. But who knows? Like you said, I think he's a guy that may want to go on early second round. That a team may just at that point.
And at that point, that value is great to me because I mean, it's very rare you have a guy as long as he is that can do some of the things that he can do. It's just you don't see it enough, and he's kind of he's got to like a lot of these guys. He's got to get in the weight room. He's got to get stronger. Right. But you can take that time to develop him, and it might be better for him in some ways because. If it may be tricky, but that second, let's say you sign a longer term deal on that second round contract, you sign like a Mitchell Robinson type of deal, that 4-year deal. Maybe by year 3 or 4, he's like a real player because he fills out, he gets in a good development program, and now he can cash in on a major deal in the unrestricted free agency. So sometimes it's better to be in that position than be a late first round pick, even. So it's something to think about.
My second faller is another point guard, like you mentioned, similar in the vein of Nick Smith, another freshman guard. Mine is Tayson Wallace, freshman guard out of Kentucky, who I think Wallace is a good player. I think he's a guy that has an NBA role and an NBA skill set that is fine. But I think, like you mentioned, I just think that there's such a gluttony of guards in that range that it's not going to be easy for him to step in from day one and have a role, and also not only that, but then also It's not going to be easy for him to find a spot in this draft because there's so many teams that are. There's only been so many teams that are going to be drafting point guards, and he is one of those guys. I mean, you mentioned the guys he's competing with in that late lottery, mid first round with Black, Keontae George, Nick Smith, to a degree, Jordan Hawkins. You mentioned Hood Schifino. I mean, all these guys, these teams that are going to be drafting guards are going to be looking at all these guys. And so Wallace, you're going to have to ask yourself, he offers none of the scoring pop that any of those guys that I mentioned offer.
That's true.
What he does offer, he offers something that none of them offer, which is
an
elite defensive prospect.
Yeah.
And that is valuable. And it's why, as I mentioned, with Tariq Whitehead, and I mentioned with Nick Smith, more specifically with Nick Smith, it only takes one team, in this deal. When it comes to a draft, it only takes one team that's like, we are pretty much set when it comes to offensive scoring punch. We just need a guy who could be a DeAnthony Melton type and just be a great defensive player who can kind of shoot it a little bit. And then all it takes is that one team to draft Tayson Wallace. But if he winds up being the fifth or sixth guard in this draft, like, that might wind up being a guy's pick 20 as opposed to a guy's pick 12. So I don't hate him as a prospect. I don't think that he has the star upside that some of these other guys have. The one thing that'll help him, and it's a pretty caveman mentality, but the Kentucky guys, man, they just wind up being better. The guards particularly, they wind up being better than they were in college. And Wallace was a 5-star guard coming out of high school. Texas guy similar to Tyrese Maxey. And these guys, they go to Kentucky. It's a weird recruiting pitch because Calipari can be like, in one hand, you're like, he takes these 5-star guys and they look bad in college and they end up getting drafted lower than they were projected to, and then they end up being better than where they were drafted in the NBA. So he could just point to, look, they're making all this money, so he can continue to go to Kentucky. I think that is the one saving grace that may help Tayson Wallace. Just the history of Kentucky guards is really good in the first round. So, I'm not super high on Wallace personally.
Yeah, Wallace is an interesting case because, like you mentioned, absolute pitbull defensively. I would anticipate that Davion Mitchell's career track would hurt Wallace. You would say probably. I don't know, given where Davion, how we looked at him. Now he's a guy that actually kind of fell in his draft, right?
Davion?
There was, right. What was he? 9?
Like 8 or 9.
Yeah, I mean, there were some people thought he'd go 6 or 7 in that draft. It wasn't like he fell off the face of the earth, but I'm saying given where he went, it was okay. And it was shocking that the Kings took him. They were like, what the hell? Why would they take him at number 9 with all the guards they had? So it was a mini fall, not anything crazy. But I say that to say okay, that's a guy that was drafted at 9 who had a much better offensive, now way older, 4 years older almost. But a guy that had a much better offensive profile, but you harped on the fact, okay, this guy's an excellent defensive player. Yeah. You look at where he was drafted and say that was...
defensive point guards, him and Smart, are the guys that have been defensive first point guards that have been drafted.
Right. And it's Mark's was 7, I think?
6, yeah.
6, I knew he was 6 or 7. So, I mean, it's in hindsight, those guys are valuable. So, I don't want to say, those were bad picks. Because you can get who else are you going to draft given the other guys that are behind them? But I think for these teams in their heads, when you're drafting at 9, you're thinking you may be getting a future All-Star.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, both the Kings and Celtics both thought these are low risk picks because of what these guys do on defense. But we're drafting these guys to be our point guard of the future, not our defensive stalwart, change of pace guy, but our future All-Star point guard.
Right.
And that's not what either guy's been.
Right. Now, of course, every draft is different. Scouting is different. The talent level is different. So maybe Smart or Davion Mitchell go different in a different spots in a different draft. Now, Smart was actually a really talented draft. So, the fact that he went that high said a lot about him at that time. So, I bring up the Mitchell point, though, because I'm always looking for one-for-one comparisons in terms of how teams will look at other guys and how they had success or didn't have success and wonder what it means for certain guys. I mentioned it with Murray. I wonder with Wallace, will they say, okay, there are some similarities to Davion Mitchell, but like he wasn't as good as Davion Mitchell in college. So am I going to draft him in the Davion Mitchell range? And maybe you shouldn't think that way. Like maybe you should just go whatever your board says. But I do think some teams will consider that and will ask that question. I do think that you make a good point though that he does something that the other guys don't have. All these guards that you're talking about. I mean, Black is a great defender too, but like it's different. He's 6'8".
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
but like
I wouldn't say he's Tayson Wallace, but yeah,
I wouldn't say he's Tayson Wallace, but like, but also they're totally different players, so it's like even hard to really compare them.
The guard different guy, yeah,
right, exactly. But like to me, those other guys are all offense forward. And like I kind of mentioned with Nick Smith, like the problem I have is like, you better be nice if I'm drafting you as a point guard and you're an offensive guy. Like you gotta be like Scoot. You know what I'm saying? So I wonder if it may help him say, look, like all these guys aren't perfect offensively. This guy I know can guard people. So maybe teams will lean on that and say, hey, get him in our development system and we can turn him into a really good offensive player. Like, you see some of these guys that are contributing in the NBA playoffs, you know, guys who I think were better offensive players than him, but Austin Reeves, Gabe Vincent, you know, guys who got into certain development systems and we've seen get better very quickly in their NBA careers. Maybe they say, hey, this guy can already defend and we can get him a shot. We can get him, you know, some player development in terms of his offensive bag. Yeah. Maybe he can give us something offensively. So he's a guy I think he's a very swing guy. He could go where he goes and it wouldn't shock me. He could fall and it wouldn't shock me. So I think it's an interesting thing. I know I put risers there. I got to put fallers on your lower third, but Tayson Wallace is definitely an interesting one.
Other defensive minded point guards that were drafted in the top 10. It's not a great list. Frank Ntilikina, obviously.
Right.
Chris Dunn.
Right.
Those are some that jump out immediately. I wouldn't say Moutier was defensive minded, but I think people liked it. It's just potential.
Ironically, he ended up being a terrible defender.
Yeah, terrible defensive player. That's why I hesitate to even mention him.
No, but you're right. People thought he'd be a defender. So
yeah,
that's not
that
like
was
wrong
viewed as a plus going into it. Dyson Daniels, I think, is another name that you could.
Yeah, year one's early, but yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's a weird thing, like, you know, and then obviously, like, if you're thinking about like guys who drafted later, like Drew Holiday, you know, ended up being a great pick at 18. Like, so it's not like Alfred Payton's another name, by the way. It's not. Did not work out. So that's what I'm saying. Like, and I think Wallace, I don't think he'll go in the top 10. These are all top 10 picks I'm naming. He might wind up going 14, and that might not be that bad. Again, DeAnthony Melton is the name that I think about, and DeAnthony Melton's a good NBA player. I just don't think any team would be happy drafting DeAnthony Melton in the top 12.
Yeah.
If you drafted DeAnthony Melton in the top 12, you're going to wind up regretting it. Not regretting it because he's a bad player, but just because there's someone else that you probably could have taken that you would have rather had.
It's an interesting thing, and it's crazy because Melton's a guy who, what do you go, second round? I mean, guy is a stalwart.
Exactly.
Player. He's a really good player. Yeah.
You know, and obviously I name all these point guards. I mean, there's plenty of guys who are offensive minded point guards that, you know, also stunk, like Trey Burke and DJ Augustine and, like, you know, Kobe White, like guys that, you know, weren't. And stink obviously is a relative term, but just guys that never ended up being all-star point guards. So it really, there's no like obvious, you know, way of doing it. But again, the history for the defensive-minded guys hasn't been great.
It is not, and that makes the Wallace case a very interesting one. But that's going to do it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed this conversation talking about NBA draft risers and fallers. We got plenty of time until the NBA draft, so it'll be interesting to see. We look back and say, did these guys go where they were mocked to start this draft process? Did they end up going much later? We'll certainly be following and paying attention. But that'll do it for now. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video. Of course, make sure you guys leave a comment in the comment section. Let us know what you think about this risers and fallers edition of this NBA Draft New Generation Media video. Do you have guys that you think may fall in this draft? Do you have guys that think that may rise up on the boards? Give us a shout out. Make sure you hit us up in the comment section. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel New Generation Media as well to get more of our NBA draft coverage for the next month and beyond as we get right into the nitty-gritty of NBA draft season. So it should be a good ride. That'll do it for now, though. Thank you guys again so much for checking us out. For Kendall, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace.